There is a quiet illusion that stalks nearly every choice we make. It whispers not in commands but in comforts. It tells us we're safe when we agree. That silence is virtue, that the many must know more than the few. From the moment we're born, we are folded into a rhythm not our own. We mimic gestures, we repeat phrases, we applaud what others applaud, often without knowing why. And at some point, we begin to confuse imitation with identity. But here lies the contradiction. We speak of freedom, yet most people willingly surrender it. For the warmth of agreement, for the quiet nod of the crowd. Even as they march in unison, they call it independence. Even as they echo borrowed beliefs, they call it authenticity. Why? The answer begins deep in our biology. We are social creatures. In ancient times, being cast out meant death. Survival was not a solo act. The tribe meant protection, food, warmth. Our brains evolved not just to think, but to conform. And while the wilderness has been tamed, the instinct remains. What once kept us alive now keeps us in line. This is what Gustave Le Bon called the psychology of the crowd. A peculiar transformation occurs when we become part of a collective. Individual reason dissolves. Emotion spreads like fire. Responsibility vanishes. The crowd becomes a single organism, capable of loyalty, cruelty, compassion, or violence, depending on what story it tells itself. Le Bon observed that in crowds, intelligence sinks while certainty rises. People become capable of things they would never dare alone. Morality bends to the mood of the majority. Carl Jung went even deeper. He argued that the crowd is not just a group of people, it's a psychic force, a devouring one. It consumes individuality. It replaces the inner voice with collective noise, and worse, it makes the destruction feel good. Jung warned that when we merge with the group mind, we lose what makes us whole, the self. History offers chilling confirmation. During the Salem witch trials, entire communities collapsed into madness. Friends accused friends. Mothers betrayed daughters. A shared fear, amplified by conformity, became a moral crusade. None dared question the crowd until it was too late. In the 20th century, entire nations were swept into hysterias of violence and propaganda. Rational people nodded along to irrational ideologies. Ordinary citizens became informants, executioners, believers. Not because they were monsters, but because they were afraid to be alone in their doubt. The crowd does not always shout. Sometimes it smiles. It praises obedience. It is called compromise wisdom. It labels silence as strength. And when you hesitate to speak your truth, it comforts you. It reminds you that blending in is easier than standing out. That agreeing is safer than asking questions. But here is the danger. Once you've given your voice to the crowd, it is no longer yours to reclaim. You begin to adopt opinions you haven't examined, defend causes you don't understand. You feel indignation on behalf of others. Not because you care, but because the group tells you to. Your outrage is not born, it is borrowed. Are you truly choosing your beliefs, or are they being chosen for you? The modern world has only deepened this tension. We are more connected than ever, yet more afraid of disconnection. One unpopular opinion can cost you your reputation, your career, your peace of mind. So, we adapt, we camouflage, we wear masks. But masks have a cost. Every time you betray your truth for the comfort of the herd, you abandon a piece of yourself. And if you do it long enough, you may forget there was ever anything beneath the disguise. The crowd is not just around us. It's inside us. It lives in our fears of rejection, in our thirst for praise, in our longing to be liked. And unless we confront it, unless we see it for what it truly is, we will never be free. We begin not with rebellion, but with awareness. And awareness starts by asking the most dangerous question of all. What part of me is still obeying, just to be accepted? You think you're being yourself. You think your preferences, your dreams, your sense of humor, your beliefs, all of it is you, unique, self-authored, chosen. But what if you're following a script you never wrote? From the moment we can speak, we are handed lines. Be polite, be normal, don't question, smile, clap when others clap, dream, but only within the walls you're given. These aren't choices, they're instructions, coded into us by culture, repetition, and reward. Sociologist Irving Goffman called this the presentation of self. According to him, every social interaction is a performance. You are the actor. Society is the stage. And your personality? Often just a costume tailored to fit the audience you're in front of. At school, you perform obedience. At work, professionalism. At home, conformity to your assigned role. You shift your tone, your expression, your vocabulary, without even noticing. The more seamless the performance, the more you're praised. The better you act, the more people call you real. But what happens when you've played the role so well? You forget it's a role? Slavoj Žižek offers an unsettling idea. He says ideology isn't something we believe. It's something we do without thinking. It lives in habits, in rituals, in jokes and holidays and hashtags. We don't see it because it's the lens we're looking through. And this lens tells us what's acceptable, what's beautiful, what's dangerous, what's worth wanting. We scroll through digital landscapes that look like freedom but function like conditioning chambers. Every like, every share, every carefully crafted selfie is part of the invisible rehearsal. Algorithms amplify the script, perform what gets rewarded, suppress what doesn't. And the most dangerous part? It works. You get attention, validation, maybe even success. But beneath the applause, something erodes. A quiet doubt grows. Is this really me, or just the version that's allowed? History doesn't whisper here. It shouts. During McCarthy era, America, citizens were forced into performances of loyalty. Artists, teachers, and ordinary people lived in fear of being accused, blacklisted, or disappeared. Not for crimes, but for ideas. Questioning the script meant becoming the villain. China's Cultural Revolution. Millions were swept into a tidal wave of forced ideological expression. Families were torn apart, books burned, public shaming became performance art. It wasn't enough to obey, you had to display your obedience, loudly, visibly, constantly. This is what makes the script so powerful. It doesn't just tell you what to think. It makes you think the thoughts are your own. Picture a marionette walking confidently across a stage, unaware of the strings above. Smiling, dancing, speaking lines it believes it wrote. That's how most people live. Not because they're weak, but because the script is invisible, embedded, and everywhere. And when someone breaks character, says the unspeakable, laughs, at the wrong time refuses to recite the lines, watch how quickly the audience turns. Society doesn't merely reject those who break the script. It punishes them. Sometimes quietly, sometimes violently. This is why the crowd is only the beginning. It teaches you how to move, but the script tells you why. It doesn't demand force. It thrives on subtlety, a raised eyebrow, an awkward silence, 1,000 unspoken rules that bend you without breaking you. So ask yourself, when you speak, who's really talking? When you dream, whose dream are you chasing? And when you obey, do you know what you're serving? The illusion of freedom is more dangerous than its absence, because you'll defend it, even as it controls you. If the crowd seduces you with comfort, the script manipulates you with identity. You are not just in the play. You are playing a part you didn't cast yourself in. And now, the real question arises. How do you begin to see the strings? If everyone believes something, does that make it true? There's a strange comfort in consensus. When many people agree, it creates the illusion of certainty, the warmth of belonging, and the pressure to conform. But what if that agreement is hollow? What if it's not belief that unites the crowd, but fear? Pluralistic ignorance is the psychological name for this phenomenon. It's when individuals privately reject a norm, yet go along with it because they believe everyone else accepts it. Everyone's pretending, everyone's performing, and no one is willing to speak the truth first. In the 1950s, psychologist Solomon Asch conducted a now famous experiment. A group of participants was asked to match line lengths on a chart. The task was simple, but when everyone else in the room, secretly actors, gave blatantly wrong answers, most participants conformed, not because they were convinced, but because they were afraid of standing out. The deeper question is not, why did they lie, but what made the truth feel so dangerous? Stanley Milgram took this further. In his obedience study, participants were instructed to administer what they believed were painful electric shocks to a stranger. Many complied, even when the stranger screamed. Why? Because an authority figure told them to. Because others were watching. Because disobedience felt more terrifying than cruelty. We like to believe we are rational, moral, free-thinking, but history shows that consensus often masks cowardice, that truth isn't always loud, and that silence isn't always agreement. Consider the public executions of heretics in medieval Europe. Crowds gathered, they cheered, they called it justice. But how many in the crowd quietly doubted, secretly mourned, silently feared? We'll never know. Because dissent, when surrounded by certainty, often disguises itself in silence. Or look to the 20th century, when totalitarian regimes demanded unity, not just in action, but in thought. In Nazi Germany, dissenting opinions vanished not only through censorship, but through peer pressure. Neighbors watched, children turned into parents. The consensus was not true. It was surveillance in disguise. George Orwell warned us about this in 1984. In his dystopia, truth was whatever the party said it was. 2 + 2 could equal 5, if the group agreed. Rewriting history wasn't a crime. It was policy, reality, bent to the will of consensus. Hannah Arendt called it the banality of evil. The idea that atrocities aren't always committed by monsters, but by ordinary people convinced they're doing the right thing, because everyone around them seems to believe it. And that is the real danger of consensus. It feels like truth, but often functions as control. It smooths over doubt. It silences complexity. It rewards agreement and punishes ambiguity. Imagine a library burning, shelves of ideas erased, and around it, people cheering, not because they're evil, but because they believe they're protecting the truth. The books burn in the name of safety. The smoke rises in the name of virtue. That is the myth of consensus. When enough people agree, even destruction can feel righteous. So we must ask, how often do we stay quiet, not because we agree, but because we fear isolation? How often do we nod along, not out of belief, but out of survival? Truth doesn't require a majority, but lies often do. This is where the illusion of freedom begins to collapse. Because if public opinion can be weaponized, if agreement can be manufactured, if silence can be mistaken for truth, then the crowd isn't just misguided. It becomes the enforcer, the jailer, the executioner of nuance. Consensus, then, is not always a sign of wisdom. Sometimes it's the loudest mask fear can wear, and if the myth of consensus can erase truth, the next question becomes even darker. What happens to the individual who refuses to believe it? In an age where belief can be bought, curated, and fed to billions, the question becomes harder to ignore. Who benefits when we obey the crowd? The modern world has replaced torches and pitchforks with likes and retweets. But the mechanism is the same. The crowd still moves together, not by thinking, but by reacting. Not by seeking truth, but by chasing the next emotional hit. This isn't accidental. It's engineered. In the early 20th century, Edward Bernays, nephew of Sigmund Freud, pioneered the art of public relations. He understood something terrifying. People aren't driven by logic. They're driven by fear, status, and desire. Control the narrative and you control the herd. He helped sell cigarettes as symbols of feminism. He turned bacon and eggs into the American breakfast. He didn't argue. He wasn't convinced. He created feelings and let the crowd do the rest. Now, that same strategy has evolved into something far more powerful. Algorithms, machine learning, and personalized feeds turn ancient crowd instincts into precision weapons. Every click teaches the machine what enrages you, what flatters you, what makes you feel safe in a world of enemies. Outrage becomes currency, identity becomes content, and the truth becomes irrelevant. We scroll, we share, we perform, not to understand the world, but to signal we belong. The platforms reward what spreads, and what spreads fastest is fear, division, tribal loyalty. The crowd is no longer local, it is global, digitized, and invisible. Michel Foucault once warned that modern power doesn't just punish disobedience, it internalizes control. Through surveillance, through normalization, through systems that don't need guards, because they've trained you to guard yourself. We think we're free because there are no chains, but the chains have evolved. They whisper through your notifications. They echo in your curated feed. They wear the mask of convenience and community. We used to be watched by others. Now we watch ourselves. In this world, belief is no longer a matter of inquiry. It's a product, tailored, packaged, delivered, customized to your fears, designed to bypass reason. It doesn't ask, is this true? It asks, will this keep you engaged? Truth here is not a destination. It's an algorithmic outcome. We do become believers not in ideas, but in tribes, not in facts, but in feelings. And those feelings are harvested by media companies, political machines, corporations, who profit every time we pick a side and fight. We are not just part of the crowd. We are data points in a system that feeds on conformity and outrage. And the more we obey the rhythms of that machine, the more it learns to predict us, control us, sell us back to ourselves. Imagine a human face, shimmering, uncertain, slowly dissolving into lines of code. A digital soul devoured by a glowing screen. That is not science fiction. That is now. Because this is no longer about being wrong or right. It's about who controls the framework in which those judgments are made. And in a world ruled by information overload, the loudest narrative often wins, not the truest. So ask yourself, who programmed your outrage? Who profits from your fear? Whose interests are served when you conform, obey, and repeat? This is the climax of disillusionment. Not only are we manipulated by the crowd, but the crowd itself has become a weapon, a feedback loop of belief, coded and sold. And once you see it, you cannot unsee it. But that revelation brings its own cost. Because the next question isn't about the system, it's about you. Will you obey or begin to think? In an age where belief can be bought, curated, and fed to billions, the question becomes harder to ignore. Who benefits when we obey the crowd? The modern world has replaced torches and pitchforks with likes and retweets. But the mechanism is the same. The crowd still moves together, not by thinking, but by reacting. Not by seeking truth, but by chasing the next emotional hit. This isn't accidental. It's engineered. In the early 20th century, Edward Bernays, nephew of Sigmund Freud, pioneered the art of public relations. He understood something terrifying. People aren't driven by logic. They're driven by fear, status, and desire. Control the narrative, and you control the herd. He helped sell cigarettes as symbols of feminism. He turned bacon and eggs into the American breakfast. He didn't argue. He wasn't convinced. He created feelings and let the crowd do the rest. Now, that same strategy has evolved into something far more powerful. Algorithms, machine learning, and personalized feeds turn ancient crowd instincts into precision weapons. Every click teaches the machine what enrages you, what flatters you, what makes you feel safe in a world of enemies. Outrage becomes currency, identity becomes content, and the truth becomes irrelevant. We scroll, we share, we perform, not to understand the world, but to signal we belong. The platforms reward what spreads, and what spreads fastest is fear, division, tribal loyalty. The crowd is no longer local, it is global, digitized, and invisible. Michel Foucault once warned that modern power doesn't just punish disobedience, it internalizes control. Through surveillance, through normalization, through systems that don't need guards, because they've trained you to guard yourself. We think we're free because there are no chains, but the chains have evolved. They whisper through your notifications. They echo in your curated feed. They wear the mask of convenience and community. We used to be watched by others. Now we watch ourselves. In this world, belief is no longer a matter of inquiry. It's a product, tailored, packaged, delivered, customized to your fears, designed to bypass reason. It doesn't ask, is this true? It asks, will this keep you engaged? Truth here is not a destination. It's an algorithmic outcome. We do become believers not in ideas, but in tribes, not in facts, but in feelings. And those feelings are harvested by media companies, political machines, corporations, who profit every time we pick a side and fight. We are not just part of the crowd. We are data points in a system that feeds on conformity and outrage. And the more we obey the rhythms of that machine, the more it learns to predict us, control us, sell us back to ourselves. Imagine a human face, shimmering, uncertain, slowly dissolving into lines of code. A digital soul devoured by a glowing screen. That is not science fiction. That is now. Because this is no longer about being wrong or right. It's about who controls the framework in which those judgments are made. And in a world ruled by information overload, the loudest narrative often wins, not the truest. So ask yourself, who programmed your outrage? Who profits from your fear? Whose interests are served when you conform, obey, and repeat? This is the climax of disillusionment. Not only are we manipulated by the crowd, but the crowd itself has become a weapon, a feedback loop of belief, coded and sold, and once you see it, you cannot unsee it. But that revelation brings its own cost. Because the next question isn't about the system, it's about you. Will you obey or begin to think? To be free, you must be willing to stand alone. But who can survive in the silence that follows? It's a cruel paradox. The path to truth, to authenticity, to inner freedom, often begins with exile. Not physical, always, but psychological. The moment you stop echoing the crowd, you become invisible, or worse, targeted. We're taught to believe that individuality is noble. But when someone truly dares to live it, the story shifts. They're called difficult, delusional, dangerous. The crowd doesn't celebrate the outsider. It isolates them. Søren Kierkegaard called it the leap of faith, a decision not grounded in reason or consensus, but in a deeper, terrifying responsibility to the self. To leap into the unknown without applause, without certainty. He believed that truth isn't found in collectives. It's a burden each person must carry alone. Friedrich Nietzsche described it as the loneliest loneliness. He saw that once you begin to think beyond the herd, even language feels alien. You're no longer speaking in a way others want to hear. You're no longer obeying their sacred fears. And so, you're left in the wilderness of your own mind, shivering, yet awake. History doesn't reward its heretics in real time. Galileo looked at the stars and saw a different cosmos. For that, he was branded a heretic and silenced. Socrates questioned too deeply and was given hemlock for corrupting the youth. Whistleblowers, those rare figures who speak when silence is demanded, often lose their careers, their safety, their peace. The crowd doesn't want truth. It wants comfort, and it will protect its illusions with violence if necessary. So ask yourself, what does it cost to dissent? Not just in revolutions or philosophy, but in the small, everyday ways, to speak up in a room that demands silence, to refuse a ritual that feels hollow, to walk away from people you once called home. The cost is loneliness. The cost is uncertain. The cost is being misunderstood, sometimes forever. Imagine a figure walking into a vast, dark storm. Behind them, a warm fire glows, surrounded by smiling faces, laughter, safety. All they have to do to return is agree, just nod, just submit. But something in them refuses, and so they walk forward, trembling, but honest. This is the moment that separates the free from the obedient, the individual from the echo, because the madness of isolation is not madness at all. It is a transition, a crossing of a threshold where illusion dies and something else begins. Not comfort, but clarity. Not belonging, but sovereignty. And that is why so few take the journey. Because freedom, real freedom, is not given. It is chosen, and it is earned in silence, in solitude, in the courage to be seen as wrong. The crowd will never lead you there, but if you dare to walk alone, you may finally begin to see. Once the mask has shattered, once the crowd's voice has gone quiet, what remains? At first, nothing but silence, emptiness, a void that once was filled by the comforting hum of belonging. This is the moment many fear most, not oppression but freedom, the terrifying openness of possibility, the realization that no one else is steering anymore, that the script has burned and you are left to write your own. This is where the individual is born. Carl Jung called it individuation, the process of becoming whole, not by conforming, but by confronting what lies within. It is not a journey of addition, but of integration. The fragments of personality, the suppressed thoughts, the rejected shadows, all must be brought into awareness. The parts you were told to hide must now be seen, not by others, but by yourself. And that confrontation is brutal, because for so long your identity was outsourced, defined by systems, approved by consensus. Once the crowd's gaze disappears, the question becomes uncomfortably clear. Who are you when no one is watching? Jean-Paul Sartre argued that we are condemned to be free. There is no script waiting in the rubble, no universal manual on how to be. We are responsible for creating meaning, for acting without guarantees. And that freedom is both a gift and a burden, because if you fail, you can no longer blame the system, the state, or the mob. Freedom demands ownership. Friedrich Nietzsche called it self-overcoming. The idea that the self is not a fixed entity to be discovered, but a project to be continuously reshaped. The task is not to find who you are, but to become who you could be. And that potential does not live in obedience. It lives in struggle, in refusing the easy answers, in breaking the molds before they fossilize around you. Imagine looking in the mirror and seeing not your face, but 1,000 borrowed expressions, copied from teachers, trends, ideologies. The mirror cracks, not to show your true face, but to invite you to build one. That is the task of the individual, not to rebel for the sake of rebellion, but to become a source of meaning in a world that mass-produces identity. How? Not through grand gestures, but through quiet revolutions. Meditation, where you hear your own voice without distortion. Self-inquiry, where questions become more important. then answers. Solitude, not as punishment but as a sanctuary. Art, not as decoration but as truth-telling. Resistance, not with anger but with clarity. You begin to see the crowd not as an enemy but as a mirror of fear. You begin to feel its pull but no longer need its approval. The voice that once dictated your choices now becomes background noise, a distant echo. And from that silence, something ancient stirs, your own voice. Weak at first, but honest. Unrefined, but real. This is not the end of the story. It is the beginning of a more difficult one. The story of the individual in a world that rewards masks. The story of one who chooses truth over comfort, creation over imitation, meaning over popularity. Most will never walk this path. Not because they're incapable, but because they were never told it exists. But now, you know. The illusions have collapsed. The crowd has released its grip. And in the stillness that follows, a question arises. Not from society, not from screens, not from tradition, but from within you. What will you build from the silence? Freedom is not a refuge. It is not the absence of pain, nor the guarantee of peace. It is the refusal to kneel before illusion. A choice, not made once, but made endlessly. Not an escape from reality, but the decision to face it, fully, ruthlessly. Honestly, most people don't run from freedom because it is hidden. They run because it is too visible, because it asks too much, because it makes no promises. The crowd offers comfort. Freedom offers responsibility. To be free is to be awake in a dream where most sleep by choice. It is to carry fire through a world drenched in gasoline, knowing that every word, every action, every truth you ignite could be your undoing. And yet, you carry it anyway. This isn't rebellion in the way we're taught to imagine it. Not the tantrum of the outcast, or the protest of the angry. Real rebellion is quieter and far more dangerous. It is the gentle but unshakable refusal to lie, to live a life that is not yours, to repeat a script written by the fearful, the greedy, or the dead. Freedom begins the moment you stop seeking permission to exist. Consider the myth of Prometheus. He did not overthrow Olympus. He did not raise a banner or build a kingdom. He stole fire, a single act, quiet, precise. And for that, he was chained, tortured, made a symbol of eternal defiance. But the fire remained. This is the powerful fear. Not revolution, but awakening. Not mobs, but individuals who no longer need approval. Not destruction, but clarity. They fear those who carry their own fire, who do not ask to be lit, but light themselves and others. There is another myth, one often forgotten, the myth of the eternal return, the idea that all things repeat, that history is a wheel and we are condemned to forget again and again. But the fire is not a memory. It is continuity. It burns through cycles, through silence, through the long winters of obedience. To hold on to it is not to win. It is simply to not surrender. Look back now, from where you stand. The crowd, the noise, the masks, the scripts, all of it. See it not with anger, but with understanding. It wasn't built to destroy you. It was built to keep itself alive. You were never meant to break away. But somehow, you did. And so, you walk forward. Not toward a promised land, not toward peace, but toward the truth, with eyes unclouded, with a flame that does not ask the wind for permission. This is the paradox of freedom. It costs everything, but gives back something far more valuable than comfort, the ability to live without lying to yourself, to say no when the world chants yes, to stand, even if shaking, to remain human in a time that worships machines, numbers, algorithms, and masks. That Fire in your hand, it will flicker. It will threaten to die. People will call it dangerous, irresponsible, arrogant. They will say it's easier to come back, to blend in, to be liked, but deep down, you'll know. They're not talking to you. They're pleading with themselves, because your fire reminds them of what they buried. You were never born to belong. You were born to burn, brighter, even if alone.